the Obama administration, Ash Carter, who was then head of acquisitions at the Pentagon, led an initiative to identify improvements in how DoD contracts for services. This initiative was called Better Buying Power, and it identified $90 billion in potential savings over 12 years. Let me say that again, $90 billion. One of the biggest recommendations was changing the way that DoD writes contract requirements when it buys services, everything from cleaning buildings to management consultants. The GAO wrote, and I want to quote what the GAO said, determining whether to contract for such services, eliminating duplicative or unnecessary services, and effectively managing and overseeing contractors is vital to DoD achieving its missions. Ms. Field, help me translate those recommendations into terms that people who don't do acquisitions policy for a living will understand. Is this the basic idea that you can protect your budget when you're buying a service by being clear about what you expect from whomever you hire, and that you should probably do an assessment on the front end to determine whether or not you need that work at all? Is that about right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And maybe to give an example in DoD, this would be, for example, one of the services, let's take the Army, deciding that it needs to figure out how much it's spending on grounds maintenance, right, which is something that happens at military installations across the world. Under this practice, the Army should figure out how many contracts does it have for grounds maintenance, how many does it need, and how can it cut costs by perhaps consolidating contracts. It's pretty simple. It's something that we all do in our own households.
Ask for a volume discount.
Right, absolutely. So that's the idea.
Okay, okay. You know, it's a really important insight because we're talking about things that pretty much every business in America does, and pretty much every family, by figuring out in advance what they're getting and what they're paying for it. So do you have any idea, Ms. Field, how much money DoD would save if they conducted these reviews before they shoveled the money out the door?
So I don't have an across-the-board estimate for you, but I'll offer 2 points. The first is that we know that when 2 of the smaller DoD components use this practice, that's specifically the Defense Logistics Agency and the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, DTRA, when they did this, they saved hundreds of millions of dollars. And
so
those
hundreds of millions for just the smallest.
Those 2 small components.
Okay.
And my second point I would offer is that if you think about the amount that DoD writ large is spending on services contracting, $205+ billion, if they were able to save just 1% of that, there's $2 billion right there. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of potential.
And that's a 1 year.
That's 1 year.
Mm-hmm. And it compounds over time, as you were talking about, the effects of this. You know, it's great that DLA and other agencies are saving money, but it's the military services who buy the lion's share of the services here. So I just want to make sure that I understand that the military services are not doing similar reviews to the kind you talked about across other areas to eliminate duplicative contracts and try to save money.
So originally, they really were not doing it, which is problematic because, as you mentioned, they account for about 3/4 of the service contracting dollars for DoD. GAO recommended that the services adopt this practice. They have begun implementing it to varying degrees of success, but we are just about to issue a new report in the coming weeks that will identify some recommendations for the services to do it better, to hopefully get better results.
Good. You're going to make this recommendation to the same services that you said have the lowest rate of picking up your recommendations. Is that right?
Our hope is that they will take them seriously and implement them.
Maybe we will find ways to make them take this more seriously. You know, I just want to underscore here about how we're leaving money on the table here. The Better Buying Power initiative that I talked about a minute ago estimated that sharpening DoD's pencils on review requirements alone could save $44 billion over 10 years on consulting and research and development contractors. If we got even 1/10 of that savings, we would be talking about real money here. When DoD asks for supplemental funding, we should remind them that by following a few basic accounting and oversight practices, they'd have another $44 billion to spend, and ask why, if they really need this money, they haven't already done that. This is just one area where DoD could score huge savings. You start to multiply that in other areas, and we are talking about significant money here. So I'm going to make a closing statement. You have a closing statement, anything you want to say? I just want to thank all of our witnesses. I want to thank you for your service. I want to thank you for testifying today. I want to thank you for continuing to make recommendations and to stay on this. I also want to thank John Clark and Gary Lealing and Andy Scott and Sophia Kamali and Noah Sisk and Sean O'Keefe and Katie Magnus and Brendan Gavin for their work in helping put this hearing today. I really appreciate your contributions. I'm looking forward to working with all of you. We are committed to ensuring that service members and their families receive all of the resources and all of the support that they need. It is clear from today's hearing that DoD has a lot of work to do to make sure that we have the right cost-efficient mix of federal employees, military personnel, and contractors. Those failures add up. DoD's own estimates say that we could save $90 billion over the next 12 years, and our witnesses today have identified other areas where we can save, and we know there are more reports coming on this. I remain concerned that the Pentagon is too focused on increasing its budget and neglecting to exercise due diligence to prevent waste and fraud in the money that we have already allocated.